Okay, so I think we will get going. So a couple of minutes beyond our start time. So I just want to welcome you to our workshop today, which is all going to be about meal planning, budgeting, and batch cooking. I have done two other sessions throughout the course of this wellness festival so far, which have been recorded. So if you are also interested in sports nutrition, or if you are interested in improving your energy levels using nutrition as a helpful tool, then I have done two sessions so far which have been recorded, and you can access that on the Get Moving Cam website. This one will also be recorded, so if you don't manage to make it to the end of the session, then you can go back and watch this once that has been uploaded onto the website as well. Okay, so just a little bit about kind of what we're going to do today. First of all, a little bit of a session overview. So what we're going to be covering really, thinking obviously about those three main points: meal planning, budgeting, and batch cooking. But along those lines and kind of threaded throughout the whole session, we're also going to obviously be talking about healthy eating in general, food for health and longevity, kind of I'll do to start with, and what healthy eating actually means. And then how we think about using those healthier foods to cook on a budget, because I know that is something that often I get comments from clients saying, how do I eat healthy, but actually, it's quite expensive, or how can I eat on a budget? So hopefully some really top tips on how to keep kind of costs low when you're trying to eat as healthy as possible. Batch cooking top tips. So again, kind of how we use those healthy foods in certain meals, how we can cook them, how we can make our lives easier for ourselves, make it more convenient. So make healthy food like convenience food is, but actually it is going to be a healthy option. And then looking at meal planning options and ideas, just what that really means, what that means to you, you can think about what time you might have to give to something like meal planning, and I'll give you various options depending on kind of your lifestyles, and how much time you might have, and giving some suggestions there. Hopefully it'll also be a little bit of time for any questions at the end. So if you do have any specific questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or kind of write them down, and you can come on and actually ask them right at the end. I should have time for that. I will put all of my contact details on the screen also at the end, and I've notified as well, so that if you just want to email me separately to ask a specific question relating to something we're covering today, then you can get in touch then. Okay, so I'm just going to let a couple more people into the room. Okay, so just a little before we actually get started on that, just a little bit about me. So those of you who haven't been to one of my sessions before, my name is Caroline Collard. I have a business called Proformance, which is based in Histon and Impington, just outside of Cambridge. I am a registered nutritionist, and a lot of the time in terms of what I do nutrition-wise, I work a lot within sports nutrition, but also just your general kind of chronic disease and weight loss as well, of course, healthy lifestyles and really healthy eating in terms of, well, various reasons why people might want to start doing that really. But I also am a qualified personal trainer, and I specialise in working with people, certainly with the sporting world, doing strength and conditioning and injury rehabilitation. So I do a lot of that on a regular basis. And then I also include, as part of my rehab stuff, kind of massage therapy, particularly sports massage therapy. And like today, I do a lot of one-to-one consultations, workshops. I work with small groups. I do presentations, and webinars, both for businesses, but also sports teams and things like that. Okay, lots of people coming into the session, which is brilliant. So I'll try and keep adding people in as we go along. Welcome to those of you who have just joined us. You kind of just missed our little intro on what we're going to be covering, but hopefully, obviously, the title of meal planning, batch cooking and budgeting will give you a clue as to what we're going to be covering in today's session. So what we're going to go on to first of all, which I said is going to kind of be a common theme throughout, even though we've got those three particular topics that we're going to be looking at today, we want to be really also thinking about the thread of healthy eating, healthy lifestyle, etc. to go along, because I'm sure, again, that's something on the forefront of a lot of people's mind, particularly at this time of year. So I often start a lot of my presentations with, and if you were in my presentation last week on eating healthy for energy levels and improving energy levels, you will have seen them before, so apologies for that. But I always like to really highlight the reasons why people might decide to make some healthy lifestyle changes, and particularly within nutrition. You know, unhealthy lifestyles, obviously too much body weight in particular as well, does account for so many more premature deaths and is really necessary, and resulting in lots of these common chronic diseases that we see, which are in the majority of cases preventable. Things like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, having high blood pressure, high cholesterol, even some things which perhaps people don't, register with some people as being kind of linked to nutrition in particular, things such as fertility issues, sometimes brain diseases, and of course things like physical stress, emotional stress, and sleep issues as well. Lots of those things are obviously a culmination of lots of kind of holistic factors when it comes to things like emotional stress and sleep issues, but good nutrition really does help with a lot of those things. It can really play a large part when it comes to trying to kind of reduce stress, and they kind of go hand in hand. The more stressed we are, often we make kind of more unhealthy choices when it comes to food. We find it harder to kind of focus on staying on track with nutrition and things like that. So, it's a bit like a vicious circle sometimes. So if we can get one of those things in place, and hopefully that will help with the other. So it's always worth kind of thinking about what are some of the big reasons, what are your whys as to why you might be thinking about making some lifestyle changes, particularly when it comes to nutrition. Okay, so firstly, what is healthy eating? There is so much confusion out there these days. Obviously, there is a lot of marketing, which can really confuse us. There is a lot of advice, not just government advice, but, things that we see on social media. We think there are people out there who are not just, when we're thinking about influencers, but people who we would feel are quite kind of seem like they know what they're talking about, trusted people, and it's always kind of worth coming back to the basics when it comes to nutrition, rather than getting so confused by all the different advice. So one of the things I often first start with is just going back to, again, kind of something that is released by kind of Public Health England. Only actually really was updated quite a long time ago now, really, about 7 or 8 years ago, but it is still used kind of as a basic guide for most people today, and that is the Eat Well guide, which you can get a copy of this on the kind of government website if you would like to download your own copy. And obviously it gives you a bit of guidance on things like packaging, so you can see the kind of traffic light labels there, thinking about how much we should be drinking and consuming, how much in terms of what types of things should go on our plate. So obviously, because a massive portion of what should go on our plate should be kind of whole foods in terms of fruit and vegetables in that green section, and then in the yellow section, kind of ideally the least processed kind of starchy carbohydrates type foods, using mainly whole grains as much as possible for your kind of carbohydrate load. And then you've got smaller sections with your proteins, which should include a real variety of proteins, not just consuming the same things, a mixture of you can see different, obviously there is meat and fish there, but we've also got things like lentils and all sorts of different kind of legumes which we can get in there as well. And then we have some much smaller portions for things like dairy, and obviously our fat content. That purple section there is for the really high calorie density foods such as oils and butters and things like that. So obviously, we've got the slightly less healthy things on the outside. Doesn't mean it can't be part of a healthy diet. It just means we really need to think about the quantity of those things. And obviously, in general, the quality of our food is really, really important, which takes me on to having a look at this. So when we're thinking about healthy eating, rather than what a lot of people do, is focusing on what we call the macronutrients or the macros, which is your carbohydrates, proteins and fats. It's obviously important to know about those foods, and particularly the calorie load and the calorie density of those foods. But what's also important to think about is the nutrient density of the foods that we're putting into our diet, and that relates to the quality of the food that we're putting in our diet. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, when we're talking about quality, that everything has to be organic or the highest, what would be purported as a really high quality item. What it means is ideally foods in that top category that you can see there that we would name whole foods. So foods which haven't really been modified, changed, processed in any way from their original source. So you can see obviously in that category we've got things like fruit and vegetables, we've got beans and pulses, we've got herbs and spices, we've got kind of meat and eggs, we've got whole grains in there, again whole grains that haven't actually been changed yet, and things like nuts and seeds as well. Now, obviously, they all have slightly different calorie density, so it's still worth being aware of the fact that obviously some of those foods, such as the fruit and the vegetables and the pulses and the herbs and spices and even the whole grains really are really kind of low calorie dense foods, whereas obviously you've got things like your nuts and your seeds and your meat and your fish and your eggs, which are higher calorie load, but they're still whole foods and are important to have a variety of different things within your diet. So when you're thinking about what goes into your meals, when we're thinking a bit later on in this session about the kinds of foods you might be thinking about batch cooking, for example, and things that you can get on a budget within that remit, then thinking about trying to get as much of your plate filled with those whole foods across your week, across your day, as much as possible is really going to be the healthiest option for you. Those foods are high in fiber. They are, which generally across the UK, but also across the world in many places, we are really quite devoid of fiber in terms of the types of foods we're choosing and how much fiber has already been taken out of them. But within those foods that are higher in fiber, they're also really high in nutrition, obviously, much higher in terms of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, all of those things which are often contained within the fiber part that often gets stripped back from foods when they get processed. So the husks of grains, for example, or the skins of fruits and vegetables, that kind of thing. You get the best nutrition within those parts of the whole food. So obviously when they get stripped back and they get processed, we lose a lot of that. And either it doesn't get put back in, so we're kind of, that's why people might have deficiencies in certain things, or they might be devoid of having certain parts of that nutrition in their diet. But sometimes it might be added back in, but often added back in synthetically afterwards. So cereal is quite a good example of this, where you might buy something which you think looks really healthy. So it might be something like wheat flakes. Sounds like it's healthy. It looks like it's healthy. Obviously, it's still been highly processed in terms of it's not representing the original grain that it started off at. Husk has been removed, it's been flattened, and then they're adding things like B vitamins, maybe added iron back in, because they've actually had to obviously take it out in the first place to process it. Ideally, we want to get those vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, etc., from things in their whole food form, packaged naturally as they should do, the way in which our body likes to absorb it, absorbs it better when it is packaged with the vitamins and minerals that it originally comes with. But actually, obviously, when we do process it and then we just add things in synthetically, and often not necessarily all of those vitamins and minerals, for example, that have been extracted already, might just add certain things in. As I said, cereal is a classic case of just adding in extra B vitamins and maybe iron, sometimes calcium, that kind of thing. And it's not necessarily also then packaged with all those other things that it would have been in the whole food form. So ideally, you just want to try and get foods in their whole food form as much as possible. Now, the minimally processed category, again, there's nothing wrong with any of these foods. It's just thinking about, A, how much has it been processed and how much has perhaps been taken away in that process, and has anything been added in. Now, normally within the minimally processed category, a lot of the time it's just something's been taken away, but nothing kind of particularly bad has been added in. So you might look at things like the nut butters there, obviously start off as whole nuts. It'd be much better ideally to eat the whole nuts rather than nut butters, but you can get that variety of processing within that category. So now we can get 100% whole nuts, which is ideal. So if you're going to process it, ideally go for something which is still the 100% nuts, nothing added in. Previously, before we kind of got into everything being a bit more whole food and less processed, you know, a lot of other nut butters will still have things added in that perhaps we don't want or need in there, that add extra calories and sometimes reduce the nutritional content. So we might have things in some of these nut butters like extra sugar added in, extra salt added in, preservatives, and often things like palm oil, which again is a really kind of high calorie density item or ingredient to put into something. Even if it's a relatively small amount, these things do add up over time if it's something you consume on a regular basis. So it's always worth looking on the back of packaging for these things when you're comparing, ideally comparing like for like when you're deciding between two food items, and making sure that you have a look at the ingredients rather than just maybe the traffic light labelling that's on the front of packaging. They are a good indicator, but sometimes aren't always showing you a kind of a really good like for like comparison. They don't often have necessarily the same quantities on the front that they're comparing. So it's always best to look on the nutritional information on the back of packaging, compare by 100 grams or 100 millilitres, depending on if it's a liquid or if it's solid food, and then also looking at their ingredients list and comparing those as well. Now, obviously, you know, I know that doing things like this extends how long it takes you to do your shopping sometimes, but most people buy very similar foods every single week, so you probably only need to do it once you know you're comparing things to make a decision on something, and then you know what you're buying in the future. We then go into the highly processed category, which, as you can see, is all our kind of common things. We'd look at that, we think, yeah, we know we shouldn't be eating too many of those things. They're the tempting foods, they're extremely highly processed, but they taste amazing. But we know that we should be kind of trying to reduce those in our diet. And one of the big kind of reasons why is, again, a bit like with the minimally processed category, these foods have not only been through quite a few processes really to get to the stage which they are from when they started off as a whole food in that top category there, and obviously they've lost a lot of nutrition through those processes. So pretty much every time a food or an ingredient goes through a process by machine, for example, in a factory, you are losing nutrition at every kind of process that goes through. Okay, so things have been extracted, taken away, but the big difference with highly processed foods is that not only have they had a lot of nutrition taken away from them, but also they've had a lot of extra additives and things added to them, which is not ideal. So sometimes it's not just a case of adding things in which have a higher calorie load, so high fat items often, or high sugar items, but also they've had lots of extra additives of other kinds. So it might be E numbers, for example. You have lots more maybe preservatives. A lot of these highly processed foods have long shelf life. So the longer a shelf life an item tends to have, the more it's probably going to be devoid of a lot more nutrition than you'd like. It's not really going to be providing you with much in terms of what your body needs, in terms of, as I say, all those micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, antioxidants. It's not going that you're going to have many of those. It's going to provide you with energy, and if you need that energy, again, there is a time and a place for highly processed foods. And those people that I work with, particularly within the sporting world, there are some highly processed items which we recommend as part of their meal plans, that are important because they need real quick energy to, you know, train and then maybe have a break and then they're going out and training again. But if you're consuming some of these foods and then you're not going out burning off that energy, you're not about to go and use your muscles, and already you've had a previous meal or a snack that actually means, you know, your muscles are full of glycogen, which is how we store the glucose and the sugars that we get from the food that we're consuming. And if those are full already, then either, you know, that extra sugar is going to be circulating around your system, it's going to kind of, you're going to be pumping out insulin to try and deal with that. And as I did talk about in my food for energy session last week, we did talk a lot about how, additional glucose like that and the insulin that gets pumped out to try and deal with that, how that has that impact on what we might describe as kind of glucose spikes. And then having to feel really lethargic after having consumed those types of foods without actually expending any energy to do something with it. So if you're interested in learning a lot more about that, then you can go back and listen to the session all about energy and how that impacts. But again, there's nothing wrong with some of these highly processed foods and being part of a healthy diet. It's just how much. So a bit like that previous slide where we looked at that plate and how much of these kinds of foods should be on our plate, it should be relatively minimal. We should be trying to really crowd out lots of those types of foods, going back up that ladder from highly processed to minimally processed to whole foods, and actually just really trying to pack our meals with as many whole foods as we possibly can, really kind of try not to change them too much from their original source. So we'll look at some ideas as to how you can do that shortly. Okay, so now we've talked a lot about healthy eating. I just want to introduce two main kind of ingredients, which I think are quite devoid in lots of people's diets. And I would love for you to be thinking during today's session when we're talking about batch cooking and meal planning and things like that, and also budgeting, to really think about these two items, because these two items that I'm going to go through, grains and greens, are some of the most nutritious types of foods that you can get into your diet, as long as you're choosing, the whole food version, so whole grains and kind of greens which haven't been highly processed into something else. And they are cheap as chips. So these are some of the cheapest items that you can buy. So the cheapest veg you can buy tend to be your dark green leafy veg, your cabbages, all kales, all those kind of things. They are not expensive. You can obviously buy organic if you want to and spend extra money, but you don't have to. They're going to be perfectly fine. We have grains. We have so many grains. I'm going to show you some examples, because I would imagine that there are quite a lot of you who stick to using the same grains if you already have them in your diet. Rice as an example. Okay, so we use a lot of rice in the UK and across the world. It's one of the grains which we have the most of, as well as things like rye, for example, in our diet, and wheat that obviously we use in carbohydrates, kind of processed products like breads and things like this. But there are so many more out there. And what's really important, as well as just getting things like whole grains into our diet in the first place, is having diversity. And within our supermarkets, there is a massive diverse range of grains that are now accessible to everybody and are not expensive. And they're becoming cheaper and cheaper because there is, as I say, kind of more variety, more people, I think, thinking about getting more whole foods and whole grains into their diet. And so it would be good if you go to the supermarket and take a look at it with fresh eyes and see what you can see down where all the rice is. There's lots of options down there, but down the other world food aisles as well, there are loads of different options. Grains are, as I say, extremely nutritious. They're a great source not only of a mixture of protein, carbohydrate and high in fiber when it's a whole grain, not obviously processed, but as I mentioned earlier, a bit like with the cereals, they're high in B vitamins, vitamin E, kind of zinc, magnesium, loads of different minerals there, other trace elements as well. They're absolutely packed with amazing nutrition, and as long as you're eating them in their whole food form as much as possible, you're going to be getting max benefit from eating those grains. Greens, again, as I mentioned, dark leafy greens are some of the best things that you can consume. So any sort of cabbage, kales, there are, I cannot tell you how many different types of cabbages I buy kind of over a month, because there's just such a variety out there now. So sweetheart cabbages, and obviously you've got your purple cabbages, you've got your Savoy cabbages, but there's at least 5 other options that I buy regularly that are just readily available in your average supermarket, and I just do a different one each week and get that into my diet. They really are some of the best foods you can eat. It also includes things like obviously broccoli, which is much more popular, I know. It is a case of the fact with greens, the more bitter a vegetable is, and I say particularly greens, generally you find there is much better nutrition in those, which I know is tricky and puts people off consuming them, but maybe it's something where you can kind of add it into other foods rather than just having it steamed, for example, having it in curries and casseroles and things like that, and trying to get some more of that into your diet regularly. They really are kind of powerhouses of nutrition. Obviously, good fibre, good source of fibre, both soluble, so things that we can digest easily, but also insoluble, which is really important. As I said, we are quite devoid of fibre in the UK. We do not eat enough, and it's really great for your gut bugs, your gut bacteria. Your good gut bacteria is really going to love you. The more kind of mixture of soluble and insoluble fibre you can give it, you're going to have a really good gut flora. And those of you who've ever been to one of my sessions where we talk about kind of the link between gut and brain health in particular, and how kind of your gut health can impact lots of other processes that go on in your body, you will understand how important it is to keep your gut flora happy. Obviously, greens have so many other vitamins and minerals, particularly things like vitamin A, C, K, iron, all those big ones, calcium, iodine, which some people can be quite deficient in, particularly those of you who've ever suffered from anything thyroid related. That's an important one to think about in your diet. Copper, obviously lots of other little trace elements, and having a mixture of sometimes having them raw, so chopped up maybe really finely, and having them as maybe part of a salad or a side salad, something like that, and having them lightly steamed as well and cooked in something, that is nice to have a bit of both. You'll get benefits from having food cooked as well as raw. And as I mentioned earlier, the darker the better, and getting variety in. So ideally, don't just choose the same kind of dark leafy every time you consume them. So just a few, I did say I'd give you a few examples of grains that those of you who don't experiment too much with grains just yet might want to have a look for in the supermarket and include as part of your meal prep, and some of the meals that we might be talking about shortly. Things like, obviously you've got rice, but within that rice category, ideally you want to get the ones which are more whole. So white rice, for example, again, there's nothing wrong with it, but it is a more processed version of the whole food that it started off as. So it has had often the original husk stripped away from it. So when it's a brown rice, for example, and then it has maybe been polished as well. It sounds like a really weird thing to do to rice, but it does kind of get polished. And again, the top layers of that, that grain as it started off as, has then lost quite a lot of its really good nutrition and fibre. So although there is a place for white rice, and again, when I'm talking to people who are athletes, or they do a lot of exercise, or they need the energy to go out and do something kind of then and there, and they need that immediate kind of extra hit of just pure carbohydrate and starches and sugars that are in that, then that's always a good option for those people. For those of you who sit down at a desk, for example, or are quite sedentary, aren't going to get up and move and use all that extra energy maybe straight away, and you don't need it quick enough into your system, then you want more slow release energy. That's going to make you feel better in general. So other rice options, things like there's black rice, wild rice, red rices, there's all sorts of options out there just in terms of rice, never mind the other ones that you can see on the screen available in your supermarkets. So we have things like buckwheat is a really great option. I describe it as quite a nutty kind of flavour. Something called Freekeh, I buy this regularly from Tesco, readily available there. That has again a very different flavour. It behaves just like a rice in terms of cooking. Similar for most of these grains, you cook them in very similar ways to rice. Sometimes they take a little bit less time and sometimes a bit more. Barley, it's a classic, particularly pearl barley, although that is slightly processed when it's the pearl barley form because it's been stripped a little bit. actually, you know, so cheap. It's really readily available, and we used to use it a lot in our cooking, kind of British cooking, in soups and stews and things like that, to bulk it out. And it is great nutrition. So if you're not keen on them, again, maybe just add it to soups and stews and things like that. Makes it really chunky. This time of year for winter warmers, and something like that to a soup or a stew is really kind of lovely, and kind of you get a really warming meal and filling by eating something like that. Quinoa has become a lot more popular. It is a, you know, it is a bit more high in protein compared to some of the grains. So those of you who are keen on making sure you get more protein into your diet, quinoa is a good one to add in. And you can get either the mixed one that you can see there on the screen, or you can get just the white or the red or the black kind of versions of quinoa as well. And then we have bulgur wheat. Now, bulgur wheat is slightly more processed, if you like. It's kind of cracked from its original kind of grain, and so it is a bit easier to cook. So if you're looking for something that's a bit quicker to cook, then go for something like bulgur wheat. But again, variety is key. So get as much variety of these kind of things in your diet as possible. I use these grains in all sorts of things. Just a few ideas here on the screen for you. So things like stuffed peppers. They're really nice. You can kind of make a mixture of a grain plus plenty of other veggies in there, with some lovely herbs, spices, other flavorings, and do those in the oven or an air fryer if you've got one. Things like making your own burgers, grain-based burgers. So I make quinoa burgers with my kids, and they really love using grains to kind of form the main part of a more of a healthy, nutritious burger. Things like Buddha bowls, which you can see in the middle, which is basically just putting a load of kind of veg, grains, maybe some pulses with it, fresh veg, cooked veg, herbs, spices, and that can be part of a nice big kind of bowl of things that you put together. I kind of use it as something, whatever I've got left in the fridge, things that I need to use up, particularly at the end of the week. I might make up a Buddha bowl lunch. Sometimes we might hear it being called a nourish bowl, or you might even describe it as a burrito bowl if you're adding things like black beans and other types of beans in there as well. And that's a really great option to add grains to. And then we have obviously anything which you might already make. So it might be curries, stew, that you can see there, that kind of thing that you perhaps normally have just a rice with. Rather than having rice, just switch out your grain. It makes really kind of no difference too much. They all taste ever so slightly different, but they all cook in the same way, and they provide a similar kind of ingredient that you're looking for to have with that kind of meal. So rather than what you would normally have rice with, you know, change it up to something else instead. Try a new grain every week, maybe every time you kind of need to top up on your grains. And then there are things like little puddings or energy balls that you can see here. I make these regularly with oats often, but you can use other grains to make these. So if you've got a recipe for an energy ball type of thing, or a little healthy treat that you can make at home that says use oats, there is no harm in using other grains either. You can use them in exactly the same way. So just cook up those grains and you can make the same thing. So it's normally the flavoring, you know, obviously that you're looking for with these. It's just the grain that gives it the texture and kind of keeps it together if you're making kind of things like energy balls or energy bars, stuff like that. And you can just switch out the grains. It doesn't have to be oats. It could be something else. So don't feel constrained by convention of what we should be eating, using for certain ingredients. You know, just be a bit experimental and try something new. Okay, so cooking on a budget. How do we use some of these types of foods and still stay on a budget, stay healthy? These are my kind of real top tips in general that I use myself on a regular basis. So I do try to buy in bulk where I can. So even in the supermarkets now, you can buy grains in and things like pulses and things like that in much larger sizes these days. So try and buy in bulk. You can buy online cheaper in bulk as well, and it still can be cheaper than buying them in the supermarket if you're buying them in large quantities. So if I'm buying some whole foods, some dry whole foods like the grains, for example, that we've been talking about, I use some websites like buywholefoodsonline.com, and obviously the bigger you buy, the much cheaper it's going to be. So you can kind of buy as big as 25 kilogram bags of certain things. So if you've got the space to store it, that's going to be a really good way to do it. And obviously, you know, if there are things that you buy regularly, you know you're always going to buy, and you can see that they're doing kind of offers in the supermarket. So often these are still marketing ploys, so you do have to be careful not get dragged into buying things that you wouldn't normally buy. But if you know it's a staple that you normally buy and it's got an offer, you know, buy one get one free or 3 for 2, all of those things, you know, do try and stock up on those where you can, particularly those that, you know, aren't fresh food, obviously. Coupons, vouchers, special offers, you know, do look out for them, do try and use them as much as possible. We've got so many options available to us. Obviously, if you do shop at a particular supermarket, make sure you have a look at what they've got on offer just before you go and do your supermarket shopping, or if there's any vouchers that you can use up. And also in the supermarkets, try to shop at discounted times if you've got the option to. So a lot of supermarkets really discount their foods in the evening, so fresh food in particular, normally between 7 and 8 o'clock, but it's always worth asking the staff at the supermarket that you shop at, what time do you do your yellow labels or whatever it is that they discount? And they normally do it twice during the day. Normally one is like a little bit of a discount, and then at a specific time later, often in the evenings, it's super discount. And I have been in at some of those times into some of the supermarkets that I've shopped in and bought lots of fresh items for ridiculously low prices. I remember going in and buying about 5 bunches of bananas for about 11p, you know, and lots of these things, don't forget, even fresh items that you buy and you think, oh, actually, well, I wouldn't get through all of those bananas or whatever it might be. But, you know, you can take them home, you could chop them up and you could freeze them. So don't forget, most fresh veg, and you don't even have, lots of people think, oh, well, I have to then blanch them and then put them in the freezer. You don't necessarily have to do that. And think about the types of foods, meals that you would put those foods in if you did do that without worrying about having to blanch them. So you could chop up a load of extra veg that you had, just put it straight in the freezer into a container or into a Ziploc bag. And then as long as you're going to probably use it in something like a curry or something that has a sauce, and it doesn't matter that the texture of it has softened slightly when it goes into those meals, then they're going to be perfectly fine. You literally just have to take them home and put them in the freezer. Reduced item section, that's always there. And actually, I went shopping last night with my children, and the first thing I said to them, they wanted to go off and get the bits they needed to go and get whilst I got the bits I wanted. And I said, okay, go straight to the reduced item section first and see what you can find, because often, again, what I wouldn't say is don't go there and get dragged into buying something you wouldn't normally buy just because it is cheaper, because sometimes you still end up spending more money. But we always just go to the reduced sections first, both the fruit and veg one and then the other items, particularly within the fridge section, which have been reduced and are things that we would definitely be going in there to buy. So we still try and stick to our shopping list, but we go and check those sections first before we actually go and find the full price item of that thing that we were going to buy anyway. So it's just going and looking at that, scanning it, has it got anything that's on my shopping list that I would have bought that's actually reduced, and then going and doing the rest of my shopping before you know, looking at all the full priced items. You might also have heard of a couple of apps, one in particular that's very popular and easy to access and use and is free to download on your phone, is Olio. So that is where you are, and you sign up to it, you let it know in the area in which you live, and then when people have excess items that they've either bought or it's going to be going out of date, or often we have local shops which kind of donate to Olio anything, again, that they would have got rid of anyway, it hasn't been sold, and then people collect these. There are people who've signed up to help out and volunteer with this on a regular basis. They will take those items from those shops and then they will put them on the app, and if you get alerts on ones that are really close to you, then you can see if there's anything that you can go and grab for free, which is amazing. And then again, it's just individuals can also put things on there which they're looking to get rid of, or perhaps they bought something and they realized they weren't going to like it, or they had bulk of it and they didn't like it, so they're going to give the rest of it away. So that's a really good app to download if you haven't already been aware of that one. The other main top tips for really just staying on budget and kind of, as I said, is not to get distracted by other things, other promotional things in the supermarkets, and having a strict shopping list and going in and sticking to it. So if you are going to be getting into what we're going to talk about in a minute, which is obviously the meal planning and the batch cooking, if you plan out your meals for the week, you want to be writing down your shopping list based on those meals and just sticking to that as much as possible. So that is the good thing about meal planning. If you actually plan out exactly pretty much what you're going to eat for your main meals and know roughly what you have for lunches and breakfasts anyway, then you don't have to go off and just buy other random things thinking, oh, well, I might use that, or that will be a good idea for a meal. But then actually, because you haven't planned it out and you run out of time, you don't end up using it. So you end up either wasting that food if it goes off too quickly, or you just kind of buy things that you just don't end up using at all and stay one of those kind of jars or tins that stays in the back of the cupboard for years. So try to stick to your shopping list as much as possible, and obviously the meal planning and the batch cooking will really help as part of that whole process. The other thing to do is to love your freezer. There is nothing wrong with frozen fruit, frozen veg. I buy so much frozen veg each week. It's still really nutritious, and sometimes some items can be even more nutritious than having the fresh version that have been oxygenated, so they've been kind of exposed during the process, the transport process from whether it's a different country or from the factory, and being exposed to the air for a long period of time can actually, it will lose nutrition in that process, whereas actually some things that are frozen at source are going to be kind of more nutritious and have retained more of their nutrition than some of those other fresh items. So, and generally frozen fruit in particular, but definitely some frozen veg as well, is just cheaper, and you can buy them still in relatively large bags, and you will get a lot in terms of not only bang for your buck, but also it's so easy then and convenient to pop those straight into an all-in-one recipe type meal. I have an instant pot, or some of you might have a slow cooker, and again, this time of year is great for winter warmers in terms of those kinds of foods, and literally just popping in a whole bag of mixed frozen veg is just such an easy way and a cheap way to get that veg into your diet. So it's a really good option. So fill up your freezer with loads of different veg and fruit as well, for maybe for breakfasts or to defrost as puddings, that kind of thing. It is much cheaper, particularly with the fruit, I would say. I have that, the frozen mixed berries on my breakfast most mornings, and then sometimes have them as a little kind of pudding after dinner sometimes. Maybe you might add some other herb spices with them, like cinnamon, for example, is really nice. And it's so much cheaper than buying fresh. So really think about using your freezer, and don't be scared also to use tinned items. So tinned fruit and veg is absolutely fine, but particularly if you're looking at getting more legumes into your diet, so beans of any kind, lentils that are already cooked, those are great. Just if you are doing tinned fruit and veg, particularly tinned fruit, just be aware of anything else that is added into that tin that's not just fruit. So obviously with the fruit, it might be in syrup rather than in its natural juices, which you want to avoid going in syrup. So always choose the natural juices where you can, and just be aware that obviously, the tinned fruit in particular is going to be that much more processed. It's going to probably have lots of skin taken off of it, some of the fibre taken away, that kind of thing. So do just be aware of that. Try to get the fresh or the frozen as much as you can. Great, someone's just popped on about the buyWholeFoodsOnline.co.uk. It is a really great website just for getting your whole foods in if you're interested in buying in bulk and getting those different grains and things that perhaps aren't always all in the supermarkets. Use cheap yet nutritious ingredients. So lots of people say fruit and veg again is more expensive, so it's hard to eat and buy lots of those, but as I say, the frozen stuff is a lot cheaper. You can still buy some tinned items as well, and some of, as I say, the most nutritious kind of veg, like the leafy greens, they are just the cheapest foods you can buy. Think about foods in particular that we grow well in the UK. So your root vegetables as well, carrots, parsnips, swedes, all the cabbages, cauliflower, broccoli, all of those things are still the cheapest veg that you can buy. You don't have to buy the exotic stuff. You don't have to go out and buy your pak choys and your Chinese cabbages and things like that. They're lovely, and if you can afford to do it, great. But stick with the basics, because there's still variety within those that are cheap. So go and have a look at your kind of veg aisle with fresh eyes see what else is available, what variety is there, try something new maybe every week if you can. We also have, so we're going to have a little look at the benefits of food prepping as part of something which is going to be hopefully helpful to keep you on track, both nutrition wise, but also it's going to take a little bit of stress out of your life as well. We'll talk about a bit more in detail on food prepping in a moment, but just in terms of the benefits, if you are thinking about doing food prepping, it really does save time in the long run. So if you think about what it is that you pick, let's say 7 main meals for your evening meals, or 5 evening meals for the weekdays where you're kind of restricted on time, and then maybe a couple of weekend meals that you'd either have at lunchtime or in the evening. If you just decide roughly what those meals are going to be, you don't necessarily have to say I'm going to have them on those set days. It's just I'm making sure that my shopping list includes food for all of those main meals and that you've got them at home ready to do. When you know what you're going to be eating, you've got the right shopping, then you can really save time by, although dedicating a little chunk of time maybe at your weekend or on a day off if you don't work one of the weekdays or an evening, doing a couple of hours of food prep. Now that can go to all different kinds of extremes. It can be really extreme where you literally prepare every single meal, you batch cook it all, you prep it all in a set, you put it all in tubs, you freeze some of it, you put some of it into for the next couple of days. You've got everything you need for kind of snacks, and maybe you prepare breakfast. If you do something like overnight oats, you can easily batch cook and prep a load of those and have those ready for your Monday to Friday, and then you could kind of batch make your packed lunches and things like that. You can do as much of that if you want to, but what you can also do is scale that down to whatever suits you in terms of the time that you've got to prep. So that could be scaled right down in terms of literally just cooking up a few grains, maybe some legumes, some harder vegetables, or even things like pre-making things like jacket potatoes in one go, and then storing them at home in the fridge. Just to save you that little bit of time. So it's thinking about your day, your week, how it's going to be, which ones are the days in which you're most likely to perhaps make alternative less healthy choices because you're so strapped for time. Think about those days in particular and think, right, what could I prep ahead that's actually the thing which takes the most time to cook on the day? Could I pre-cook that? So I do things like this. I might pre-make a whole pasta dish and then keep that ready for a couple of days later. I might batch cook a load of jacket potatoes that we can have on one day because they take a good while. Maybe, you might think about them taking 45 minutes at least in an oven to get nice and cooked and crispy. You could pre-cook those and then maybe just crisp them up on the day or warm them up in the microwave if you want to. There's lots of things that you could kind of semi-prepare rather than thinking it has to be the full meal that I prep, that actually on the day you're just like, right, I've got a load of the veg already cooked and the jacket potatoes, I've just got to warm up some beans or put a tin of tuna with that jacket potato, and there I've got a meal literally within 5 to 10 minutes. So you can choose how detailed you want that to be. Obviously, when you do batch cook and food prep all in one chunk rather than doing it separately on every single day of the week, you will help to reduce your energy bills. So obviously, you're putting everything perhaps in the fire, you're trying to use perhaps some of the residual heat as well. You can reduce your energy bills rather than having to stick that oven on every single day of the week for an hour or so. As I said already, it helps you to stick to making healthier eating choices, because if you've prepped something and it's ready to go, it's like convenience food. You can just kind of get it out of the fridge, pop it in the microwave, and then it's going to be ready super quick, just like a general microwave meal. But obviously, you've home cooked it, you haven't got all those extra additives, you've controlled what goes into it as much as possible. And this over time, obviously, is also just going to save money. If you are literally cooking exactly what you need and you don't have waste, you don't have excess, then you really are going to kind of save over time. And I also find, as well as reducing stress on busy days, I have 2 children and a busy lifestyle as well, so I do find it really does help during my working week, that when I actually also go shopping, it just makes my life so much easier. I have a really kind of set shopping list. I know what I'm going for. I'm not wandering around thinking, oh, what should we have? What should I look for? Is there something new? All those things. I've got my list. I know which aisles I'm going to go to. I literally get those items. I don't kind of go off on a tangent, you know, somewhere else, wandering around thinking, what else can I add for, you know, X day or whatever. And it's just in and out, you know, very, very quickly. So I can do a full-on kind of shopping trip literally in 20 to 25 minutes and I'm done. So that kind of makes my life a lot easier. And it's still, even if you do online shopping and have it delivered, still the same thing. You don't waste time looking at things, wondering what else you might add in. Just makes your life so much easier when you do that. Okay, so batch cooking top tips if you're going to get into batch cooking and making some either whole meals or part meals ready. These are my kind of either top things to use to help out with this in terms of actual cooking, whether it's kind of utensils or cooking pots and things like that, that might be beneficial to you have, although it might be an initial cost, actually in the long run it's really going to pay for itself. Things like a slow cooker. You can buy a slow cooker for £20 or less from lots of different places these days. You know, often see them either sold in supermarkets, places like Argos, you can buy them online, and you can cook so many different things in it. It's not just curries and soups and stews and things like that. You can actually make a lasagna in a slow cooker. You know, there's such a range, and most slow cookers that you buy come with a little booklet with ideas of different types of meals that you can make, and all you're doing is, you know, again, for certain meals, you can just put it all in one pot, as you can see there in the example, put all your raw ingredients in, leave it to do its thing for the day whilst you're at work, come back and your delicious meal is ready made for you. You just got to dish it up. It's absolutely brilliant. So I use my Instant Pot, which actually has more functions than a slow cooker, but it does have a slow cooker function as well as a pressure cooker, things like that. So I use that regularly all the time. It's such a lifesaver. Just pop it all in the morning, go away, and then come back at the end of the day to a lovely home cooked meal. If you have leftovers, so another way to kind of almost save money, save time, and have things more conveniently ready for you are using things like ice cube trays for any leftovers that you might be using to make things like kind of leftover herbs, sauces, stocks, gravies. Don't just throw those extra bits away. Do put them into things like whatever's left over into ice cube trays, pop it into your freezer, and then as soon as you need some extra herbs for a meal, you can pop one out. As I say, little things that you can use for stocks and gravies and things like that. Just use those whenever you can. So try not to waste even those kinds of ingredients once you've made them. Ziploc bags or tubs you can use for storing anything that you batch cook. Ziploc bags are quite good because obviously you can continue to reuse them just like a tub. You can just clean them out after you've used them and reuse them again. But you can see in the picture there how nicely you can use the space in your freezer. So if you want to maximize the space in your freezer, you can flatten out each kind of portion that you save, or if it's more than one portion, if you've got the larger bags, and then you can really use your space really well. So you could batch cook once and not necessarily have to do it on a weekly basis. You could do it on a monthly basis if you've got space in your freezer, or if you've got a separate freezer, which is always really helpful. So as I said earlier, do love your freezer, particularly if you're batch cooking something. Stack them up, and then you can have a real variety of different things that you just batch cook all in one day, and then you've got maybe like a month's worth of food that you can kind of get out for main meals in your evenings. As I said before, you don't just have to do whole meals, so you could just do separate ingredients. So if you did have some fresh stuff which was going off, you could chop it up, pop it in a bag or a tub, and then just freeze that and then use that another time. You can also pre-cook grains, all sorts of veggies, different legumes, if you buy them from dry rather than kind of the tinned cooked versions. And again, you can freeze them. They will store for many days in the fridge. Really worried about pre-cooking stuff and then using them. If you pre-cook it, ideally you want to cool it down as quickly as possible once you've cooked it. So let's say it was a grain, You cook it, and then you want to run cold water through it, cool it down as quickly as possible, and then put it straight into the fridge if you're going to use it in the next 2 to 3 days. If not, pop it straight into the freezer. Obviously, veg as well will last for long periods of time, and then also similar if you've cooked up any beans or lentils or anything like that, again, just works in the same way. It just means when you heat it up, and I know people get really worried about things like rice in particular and other grains and heating them up, as long as you reheat them to piping hot, you're going to be absolutely fine. The idea is to make sure that you reduce the amount of time that any bacteria could be growing on that grain. So what you want to do, as I mentioned earlier, is if you cook it, then cool it down as quickly as possible, run cold water through it to really cool it down, put it straight into your fridge and freezer as soon as possible. And then when you do reheat it, just make sure it is reheated to absolutely piping hot. You can prepare single servings, you can do multiple kind of servings in one if you know that you're going to be providing this for a whole family, for example. I would just say avoid some foods that don't necessarily reheat well. So obviously things like salad items, you're not going to kind of freeze those or prep them too much and then want to heat them up. So just think carefully about the kinds of things that would not perhaps behave well if you then heated them up. And there are certain things as well that you might make and put in the microwave. I'm sure we've all done it before where we've then reheated it and it's gone absolutely solid just through trying to warm it up, and it's gone microwave solid. So just be aware of those obviously when you are batch cooking. So meal planning then, to kind of almost finish off on, as I said earlier, you choose your level of detail. Lots of people get put off by thinking about doing meal planning because they think, oh, well, I'm not going to plan out breakfast, lunch and dinner and all my snacks. You don't have to. If you've got the time and if you think that that is going to really keep you on track with a healthy diet, for example, making healthy choices to have everything planned out. And lots of people like that. They organise consistently on it, and it does keep them on track. But you can choose your level. As I say, you do not have to plan out every single meal and snack. It might be that you just need to plan out your main evening meals, which is where you really struggle with in terms of time and getting things done. So do plan your week as much as you can and that suits you, that you want to. It is a little bit of short-term pain, long-term gain when we've got to kind of food prep and meal plan. It is a little bit time-consuming just planning out those meals, thinking about it, and getting the shopping done for it, and then the prep done for whatever level of prep you want to do. But again, choose a time in your week where you can just slot out, carve out half an hour to think about it, to plan it, to do it. And the more regularly you do it, we tend to kind of eat very relatively similar meals anyway, the types of meals that we would choose during a week. Obviously, as I say, you do want variety and diversity in your diet. So essentially, it's just choosing those regular meals that you have. Let's say you do have a curry and make your own curry every week. But actually, you just vary the different types of veg that go into that every week, or the protein item, or the type of grain that goes with it. You have the same type of meal, but you make it different each week by what you put into that meal. So because we tend to stick with the things that we like a lot of the time, it then doesn't make it so much of a hardship to actually plan those out. But as I say, just maybe choose the different types of ingredients that you might vary each week that go into those. So once you get into it, it really doesn't take you too long at all. And as I said, it really is more long-term gain, both in terms of reducing stress during the week and the time that you have to spend cooking individual meals every single day, and also the long-term health benefits if it does help to keep you on track in terms of healthy eating and getting more healthy foods into your diet. I also said, obviously, plan your shopping, make sure you've got a strict shopping list and try and stick to it once you've planned out those meals, and then think about how you're going to plan your prep. How much prep are you going to do? You can even write that down as well, so that when you come to that time, let's say for me, it might be a Sunday afternoon where I've got a spare hour or two, and I think, actually I've planned which meals I'm going to make, what I'm going to prep, what actually in my week takes me the longest. Normally, if it's that day that's really stressful and busy, and that meal that takes too long, sometimes when I do end up running out of time or something unexpected happens, then, do plan it out a bit, what needs to be prepped and perhaps what doesn't, because it doesn't take too long on the day. And that is really going to save you time and stress, as I say, during your working week. So Just to kind of finish off now, a couple of little things which I always like to finish on, thinking about other healthy lifestyle habits that's going to really help you with just improving your overall health, and links in nicely to if you're trying to improve your nutrition as well. As I say, they're all kind of linked. So when you improve one, that helps to improve the other. Often sleep obviously plays a big part in improving not only your energy levels, but the better you feel, the more likely you are to make healthier choices. Relaxing and trying to reduce stress as much as possible, again, really helps with making more positive, healthy choices when it comes to our food. Adding exercise into our lifestyles helps you to regulate the food that you're consuming, of course, particularly anything that is kind of a higher sugar content, and regulating blood sugar levels. And obviously some of these new things, not only actually eating the food, but all the things we've talked about, budgeting, planning, prepping, batch cooking, those things are like new healthy habits, as well as the actual eating of those foods or doing exercise. So don't expect it just to fall into place straight away. You do have to work at it a little bit and put a little bit of time and effort to get it underway and to get that new habit in place. So don't kind of give up straight away after the first couple of weeks. Try and keep going with it, and just do the bits that you can. If you can't go full on batch cook and prep and all those things we talked about, just do one little thing that's a bit better, a bit more organized than it was perhaps the week before. And do try those new foods as well that we talked about. Try and get a variety of different veg that you haven't tried before, maybe grains or legumes into your diet as well. And if you're really struggling, maybe you can find an accountability partner. It doesn't necessarily mean the person that you live with. It could be someone a friend who is also interested in doing the same thing, and you can just give each other top tips, recipes you find, things that have really helped you out when you're doing batch cooking, little tips to help each other along, and then just kind of try and keep each other accountable to, oh, did you do this week, or did you manage to make that, stay on track, do your shopping list. All of those things can be really helpful for people. So do remember, when you're trying to get these new healthy habits into place, it is okay to make mistakes and not necessarily go all in straight away. You haven't failed. We learn as we go along, so do kind of bear that in mind, because it is progress over perfection when it comes to any new healthy habits that you're trying to put in place. And do think about it as trying to change your lifestyle, rather than just doing something like this in the short term, whether it's to lose weight or you've got a particular goal that's a short-term goal. Actually try and make some of these changes that just become part of your lifestyle, part of what you do. That's what's going to make it sustainable for you in the long term. And my last one I always love is your body, if it is something that in terms of weight loss and you're trying to improve your health in that way through these top tips, your body isn't Amazon Prime, and better health and fitness is not going to be delivered kind of overnight. Those healthy habits, as I say, minimum 30 days, but probably even longer to really establish some of these things as you go through. So do bear that in mind. So if you want to contact me after this, or you want to find out about more of the services that we offer here, both in terms of nutrition and fitness, you can go to proformanceuk.com, or you can email me at info@proformanceuk.com. I'm also on all the socials, so you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter, and even TikTok. And I'm just going to have a little look at the questions just to see if there's anything I can answer for anybody who's still on. So we've got, is there any nutritional difference between organic legumes in brine bought from the supermarket and cooking dry organic legumes, besides the obvious, the price and the time difference? So obviously, yeah, buying dry legumes such as any sort of bean, pulses, black beans, kidney beans, chickpeas, etc., etc. Yes, it's definitely cheaper buying dry and buying in bulk, which means you do have to cook them. But if you do have something like a slow cooker, again, you can just put them into the slow cooker and just kind of soak them and let them do their thing and cook them. And that is definitely a cheaper way to do it. If you bought organic legumes in brine, in terms of nutritional difference, a slight difference in terms of you will have slightly reduced nutritional content in something that has been essentially processed a little bit. If it's been in brine for a long period of time, obviously it's going to have a very long shelf life. Then you will have lost a little bit of nutrition, but it's unlikely that it has lost much of its fibre. Hopefully it will have had some of its being kind of stored in a liquid like brine, will have broken down some of the cell walls of that particular food, because again, it's like a process, like when we boil something or when we kind of cook it in the oven, we're kind of breaking down the original cell matrix of that particular food, which is a form of processing, and you will lose a little bit of nutrition in that process. But equally, when you're buying your own dry legumes, you know, you're going to be cooking those anyway. They have to be cooked, they have to be soaked, they have to be heated up, so you're going to still do a similar thing in that process. Obviously, being in the can, in a tin as such, you know, it will be pressurized, so again, it will have that extra element of a process that it's been through to get to that stage. But essentially, there's not a massive amount of difference. And if it really makes a difference to you, obviously buying something that's much more convenient in a tin, and you're making a healthy choice in terms of having that rather than something that's perhaps a much more higher calorie dense or higher fat content or much less nutrition in terms of a different food that you would have chosen instead, it's much better just make that choice in terms of having tinned. Absolutely fine. The main difference for me with those things is budgeting and saving money. When I can buy dry in bulk and I've got the time to pop them in the slow cooker to batch cook a load for the week that I can use in meals, then I'm going to do that as much as I possibly can. I have another one. I freeze scraps of veg, scraps from vegetables, carrots, onions, potatoes, parsnips, and then make a free delicious vegetable broth from it. Oh, lady after my own heart. This is absolutely key. It's a great way actually to another little kind of top tip. If you know, I try not to skin my fruits and vegetables as much as possible. So something that doesn't have to have its skin taken off, I'm going to give it a good scrub and a good clean, but I'm going to try and keep that skin on as much as possible. You know, potatoes, carrots, don't strip back some of the nutrition that is literally just sitting beneath the surface of that skin, and obviously the increased fibre that you get from keeping skins on foods as much as possible. So you're going to, you know, lose on a bit of nutrition if you do get rid of those. But if you do end up taking them off, but then using them in something like that, in a broth, maybe you can also, you know, you can blend things like that up and make them and add them to thicken up things like soups and casseroles and stews and things like that. Some people might chuck them in the air fryer and have them as their own version of a crisp. So, you know, there's all sorts of things. So again, reducing waste, reducing kind of costs as well, because you're using absolutely every bit of the veg. You know, try not to chuck away the things that I know so many people throw away, cutting off the bottom bit of the stalks of the broccoli, you know, chop them up into fine slices and cook them and have them as well. They're really nutritious. You get so much from them. So please don't get rid of the leaves of the cabbages and things like, and the cauliflower, sorry. You know, don't get rid of those. Chop them up finely if you don't like the taste of them. They're a bit too bitter for you. But remember what I said about kind of the dark leafy greens and the bitter vegetables. They really are the most nutritious things that you can be consuming. So chop them up fine, put them into other things, make them taste of something different by adding herbs, spices, and putting them into curries and soups and stews and things like that. But try not to get rid of them. Don't waste any part of your fruit or veg as much as possible. I think we have one or two more. I struggle getting my 5-year-old to eat vegetables. He's going through a phase saying he doesn't like them. I try to be one meal when he can see the veg on his plate and he has to try it but won't eat much, and the next day do a meal which has hidden veg, so I know he's getting the goodness he needs. Any advice? Yeah, I mean, I know it's really tricky with children. I've been through that whole process with my own. One of the biggest tips I can get, particularly if they're going through a fussy stage or you're just trying to get them to eat more, is to either make it exciting in terms of trying to make things out of stuff. So let's say you've got a variety of different veg, ideally different colours, saying things like, can we make a rainbow out of this food today? You know, can we make it look like a smiley face? Things like that can be quite distracting, and the more you get them involved in that, the better. If you can get the children, even as young as 18 months old, involved in making the meal that they are about to consume, both the process of, if they can go shopping with you, see where it comes from, get them to pick it up, help to put it in the trolley, be part of the whole process, then be part of the prepping process and the cooking process, even if it's just a really small amount of something. It's not the whole meal, it's just kind of getting them to do a few things where they've touched it, they've helped to prep it, get it from the fridge for you, put it on the side, help you to cut it, or whatever it might be, to grate the carrot, you know. Getting them involved in the process, that's really good because they see where it's coming from and they're actually more invested in it, so therefore they're more likely to try it. And then along the lines of the fact that most children, even if it doesn't seem it straight away, they model themselves off of their parents. Even if you're not badgering them to eat what's on their plate or to force them to have certain veg or fruit, if you're eating together, ideally, you know, or you can eat a little bit with them at the same time and put a load of those veg on the plate and just talk to them as you're saying, oh look, I've got sweet corn next, or I've got, oh look at this carrot, or this long green leafy thing here, or this broccoli looks a bit like a tree, doesn't it? You know, so kind of engaging them in, you know, the food, what it looks like, what the texture is, what it tastes like. And even if they're not kind of trying it themselves, them seeing you eating it in front of them, engaging with it, talking about the benefits of it, keeping it really positive, not using kind of negative talk about, oh, I know this doesn't taste very nice, but we need to eat it, you know, that kind of thing. Trying to kind of just keep it as positive as possible and keep reinforcing that, modeling eating it yourself in front of them, with them, as close as possible, talking about the food all the time, rather than, again, the whole negative mindset of we've got to eat what's on our plate, or we've got to eat this. You will find that over time, children, as I say, model themselves on their parents, and it will come over time, little bits at a time. The one thing that I love to do, particularly my children were kind of toddlers and going up to even today, is that I would do things at the weekends where I had a bit more time to do things like help yourself lunches. So a help yourself lunch is a bit like just creating a little buffet of all different food, but the majority of the food that I was putting out are things that I wanted them to put on their plate. But it's giving them choice. So if you give children more choice, they feel that they're in control, and they like when they're in control. So therefore, if you're putting out a buffet of different types of veg, some raw, chopped up, maybe some salady type items, but also cooked veg that they can try, as well as some things that you know they're definitely going to want to put on their plate, but not loads of those items. You've got a real variety of other things on there. Then again, you're just like, you can help yourself to however much of these things that you like, but at least you know that the majority of those items are things that you actually want them to put on your plate. And again, you can encourage them to make a rainbow plate or a rainbow meal, or create something that looks like you know, something that they're interested in. You know, maybe they love tractors or dinosaurs or whatever it might be. You know, get them to kind of make up a picture of the food that they're using with the different colors and the shapes and things, which will make up the picture for them on their plate. So little things like that, just getting them to engage with those foods as much as possible is absolutely key when it comes to children, and kind of little and often in terms of trying to, yes, encourage them to eat different things, but not necessarily forcing them to eat loads of you know, things that they think that they don't like all at the same time. I tried soup from scraps, but it was a bit crunchy with a bit of sand. Okay, well, definitely don't put sand in your soups, but sometimes you know, soup from scraps can be like that. The best thing to use is ideally a hand blender. You can still blend it up. It doesn't, you know, I know I talked about having a lot of things whole food as much as possible, but if you've got leftovers like that, and if one way that you're going to make it into something that you're actually going to consume regularly and like, use something like a hand blender to kind of blend it up a little bit more. You can still leave some chunks in there, or you could blend up the scraps and then add some extra veg in, maybe some frozen veg, as I say, like sweet corn or peas or something like that, or green beans in as the whole version to make it chunky, but at least it definitely won't taste like it's got sand in it. Okay. I love that comment, thanks. It's literally like he's doing I'm a Celebrity challenge, where he's closing his eyes and trying to swallow a carrot, even though he said that is a veg he doesn't mind trying to eat. I totally feel where you're coming from, and at least he's actually putting it in his mouth and trying it. The other thing to think about with children as well is different shapes. So if you've got any cookie cutters, sometimes if you've got cooked something that you're using and trying to get them to eat, if it's big enough, you can get them to cookie cutter it out, a bit like you might some people make sandwiches out of different shapes shapes and things. You can do that with veg as well. So that's another thing to try and get them to kind of engage with it and eat it, and just even if they're getting a bit messy doing something like that, it just makes it fun. So the more fun, the positive here, the better. Maybe you're having something that you could, they like, that they can get into. I'm not saying buy kind of like ketchup and things like that, but it could be some tomato passata, some salsa, some hummus maybe, if they're likely to like that. All of those kind of things that would just be a tiny little bit that you give them as a little thing, right, we're going to dip our veg in something today, is something different to do. So just kind of trying to be creative as much as you can and try and stay as positive as you can. And as I say, modelling and reinforcing yourself. So yeah, those are my top tips. Okay, right, I'm really pleased that we had some questions at the end there today to be able to answer. It's always really nice to be able to answer some people's personal questions, but as I say, do get in touch with me. As I say, email me info@proformanceuk.com, or you can kind of fill in the contact page on the website, and I'd love to hear any other kind of questions you might have, or if you're interested in obviously booking in a one-to-one consultation or anything along those lines, then do get in contact. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate seeing you all here today, and yeah, I perhaps look forward to seeing you at the next workshop. Okay, take care everyone. Thanks for joining me. Bye.